Hey everyone, and welcome to the final lecture of the course. Today we're going to be doing chapters 13 and 14. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Right now in the course, all you have ahead of you is Diet Analysis Part C. This is the optional extra credit assignment in which you can earn up to 6 points added to your lowest exam grade. In addition to this, we have Exam 3 coming up, and I will have released the review sheet by the time this video is published. So go ahead, do that review sheet. Exam 3, remember, is a comprehensive exam, so it's going to be primarily focused on what we've learned since Exam 2, but it's also going to contain some material from the first two sections of the course. So I won't be going and creating new questions on those materials, but you will see repeat questions from Exam 1 and Exam 2. So this brings us to Chapter 13. We're going to spend a good amount of time on Chapter 13, and then Chapter 14 we do much faster. And I am going to switch over to my laser pointer. Chapter 13 is life cycle nutrition, focusing on the mother and infant. The learning objectives for this chapter will start out by discussing the importance and roles of nutrition before and during pregnancy. From there, we'll review specific recommendations for mothers and feeding their infants. We'll explore the advantages and disadvantages of breastfeeding and formula feeding. And then we finish by reviewing principles for introducing solid foods into an infant's diet. So in this chapter, we're looking at leading up to pregnancy, and the first year of life for the infant. Chapter 14 is going to take us from the end of the first year through our elderly years. Our first slide here puts our chapter into context. So this chapter is about the impact of nutrition on the future. Now, one thing I want you guys to recognize is that it's important to establish healthful habits before pregnancy using the recommendations that we've learned in this course. This, of course, is true for mothers-to-be who are going to be carrying the baby and are going to be responsible for ensuring that the baby has all of the nutrients that it needs. So you want to establish healthful eating habits before to make sure you have a healthful body that can foster the growth of a child. It's also true for fathers-to-be, right? Fathers want to have healthful eating habits. They want to be physically active because this will increase the likelihood that they'll be able to get their loved one pregnant. Now, the other aspect that you want to think about in terms of the future and the impact of nutrition is this quote here: poor maternal nutrition impacts generation. Now, what becomes of an undernourished or overnourished fetus? They may be ill-equipped to have healthy children of their own. So it's not just about making sure that the baby that you're having is appropriate, is healthful and is able to grow and develop, but if you do not supply that baby with the right nutrients, the right amount of calories, then you are creating a baby that might not be able to grow to have children themselves. So it becomes this perpetual cycle. A poor pregnancy with a poorly nourished baby creates a poorly nourished adult with decreased ability to have healthful children of their own. So it impacts generations. Since nutrition is so impactful on pregnancy and the development of healthy babies, it's become the focus of many public health policies and the focus of a lot of research. And those two things have been very effective in decreasing the amount of infants that die in their first year of life. So you can see in 1915, we had a significant amount of deaths, but as time has gone on, they've done more research, there's been more public policy put into place, that number has come down tremendously. Another thing to note from this graph is that, like we saw when we talked about overweight and obesity, how there were racial disparities between in health, this is also reflected in the infant mortality. So you can see from Caucasians and African Americans, there's this disparity where unfortunately Black or African American populations suffer at higher rates. So before we get into talking about nutrition for pregnancy, I think it's important for us to just have an understanding of some of the anatomy and physiology associated with pregnancy. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the placenta, and this is a temporary organ in the female that supplies nutrients and extracts waste. So it helps to give the developing fetus or developing baby the nutrients that it needs to survive and grow. And it also helps to get rid of some of the waste products that are produced as a natural process. So there's an exchange of the nutrients and waste, but the two bloods never actually mix. And it's necessary to know that the placenta is a metabolically active organ and what this means is that it plays a role in hormone production. So it helps with aspects of pregnancy like preparing the mother for lactation. Connected to both the fetus or baby and the placenta is something called the umbilical cord. And the umbilical cord acts as a pipeline for blood between the mother and fetus. So it's reach down, touch your belly button. That's where your umbilical cord once was, and it connected to that placenta, and so it served as a pipeline to get the nutrients from your mother to you. The final piece here is the amniotic sac, and this is just a sac that cradles the fetus, and inside it has the amniotic fluid. So it cradles the fetus and provides a safe environment for the fetus to survive in. Well, we can see what this looks like, right? Starting here, we have our bebe, and with the bebe, we have the umbilical cord, and the umbilical cord is going to attach to the placenta. Now, in this image, the placenta is featured on this right side or the left side of the mother, but it's not always there. It can be over here, it can be over here. The placenta can also be right here, and that can become a problem. So when we blow this up, we can see how the nutrients exchange, right? There's never a direct contact of the blood together, but you can see the blood vessels of the placenta leading to the umbilical cord branch out, and they can exchange with the blood vessels of the mother. So here at these junctures, you have the exchange of nutrients and waste. In terms of the events of pregnancy, in this course we do not go over the birds and the bees and where babies come from, but we do talk about just the basic events that lead to the development of a fetus and then an infant. So it starts with an egg that is fertilized by the sperm to become a zygote. This begins as a single cell and then rapidly divides. Once it rapidly divides, eventually it's going to implant into the walls of the uterus. So that's within 2 weeks, the fertilized egg is embedded in the walls of the uterus. Continues to divide while it's implanted there, and at 8 weeks, you're going to have what's considered a fetus. And at this point, there's going to be a complete nervous and digestive system and a beating heart. And with imaging here, you can also see fingers and toes and facial structure. After this stage, we have what's called the fetal period, and that's going to take us through our last 7 months. And in this period, it's going to grow 50 times heavier and 20 times longer. So while the baby or fetus undergoes significant changes, the mother's body is going to undergo changes as well. So there's going to be increases in muscle to help the mother hold this fetus that's growing inside of her. There's also going to be an increase in blood volume and a preparation for lactation, or the production of milk for breastfeeding. Now, this image is from our textbook, right? We can see the newly fertilized cell called a zygote. It's going to rapidly divide and it's going to implant in the walls of the uterus. Then it's going to continue to divide and develop into a fetus. So you can see here we have our toes and we have our fingers, and we can start to see the shape of a head. And at this point, it's going to be floating in that amniotic sac. So then that takes us into the fetal period, where it's going to remain here for about 7 months, and then we are going to have the baby. So the whole operation takes about 40 weeks, and this we call the gestation. Those 40 weeks are broken down into what we call trimesters, and each trimester is 13 to 14 weeks. In these trimesters, we have what are called critical periods, and this is where there are developmental stages that are irreversible. So if something happens at the stages where the baby doesn't properly develop, once you get beyond that point, there's no turning back. That's going to be permanent damage. So some of the example here, at the end of the first trimester, there's a critical period for the development of the heart and the brain. And looking at these critical periods, this just emphasizes how nutrition is going to be important at every stage of the pregnancy, not just in the beginning, not just towards the end. There's importance throughout. The last thing here is the concept of high-risk pregnancies. And a high-risk pregnancy is one in which there's an increased likelihood of complications. So some complications would be a difficult birth and or impaired growth. With this, we can carry over our conversation from last lecture about risk factors. There are various risk factors that make someone at high risk for pregnancy. So BMI below 18.5 or above 25 leads to a high-risk pregnancy. If there's insufficient or excessive pregnancy weight gain, that can contribute to high risk, and we'll see what the parameters for weight gain are later in this lecture. Nutrient deficiencies or toxicity, lack of family support, low-level education, limited food availability. You can see for obvious reasons why that would make someone at high risk. Smoking, alcohol, or other drug use. Age, so if you're under 15 or over 35, that automatically makes you high risk. The more pregnancies you have, the more high risk you become. The shorter duration or interval between pregnancies is going to increase your risk, so less than 18 months apart leads to a high risk pregnancy, or more than 59 months apart. So if your babies are spread far out, it seems that there's this sweet spot in between 18 months and 59 months. Previous history, such as low or high birth weights, having more than one baby at once, pregnancy-related hypertension or gestational diabetes, which we'll learn about later, and then also if you have any pre-existing conditions like diabetes, heart conditions, lung conditions, those can obviously affect a pregnancy. So we finally landed into nutrition. Now, with pregnancy, there's going to be various increased nutrient needs. And the first one we'll look at is energy or calories. Now, calorie needs vary with progression of the pregnancy. You can see that in the first trimester, there's no additional calorie needs. So the pregnant woman is advised to just eat as she normally would to meet her maintenance calorie needs. In the second trimester, there's a recommendation for 340 additional calories. So you take whatever the maintenance calories are and you add 340 calories. And then in the third trimester, that 340 goes up to 450 additional calories per day. Now, in most instances, this is going to be met by increasing intake, but it also can be assisted by reducing activity. So, eating more and exercising less. Now, eating more is probably the better option, especially if somebody has low physical activity already, because physical activity is going to be encouraged to some degree. And we will go over physical recommendations for pregnancy in upcoming slide. So, increasing intake, preferably through nutrient-dense food. Of course, you want to consume fiber. You want to get plenty of vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients. And you can see by looking at these calories, right, is not quite eating for two, as the common phrase goes. So there's slight increased nutrient needs, but in terms of calories, it's not going to be double of your normal calorie needs. In terms of the macronutrients, we can start by looking at carbohydrate, and the recommendation for carbohydrate is that the woman consumes at least 175 grams of carbohydrates per day to fuel the fetal brain. So this is to fuel the brain, but also to spare the use of protein for energy. Right, you want to retain protein stores. And for carbohydrate, you want to have an emphasis on fiber, because constipation is a big issue in pregnancy, so it's good to have adequate fiber as well as adequate fluid to ensure bowel movements can continue as normal as possible. For protein, the DRI for pregnancy is 25 grams higher than in non-pregnant women. So you take whatever the DRI is for that age and you're going to add 25 to it. This 25 is a good number for you guys to know, a good fun fact for our final exam. For protein, it's recommended that you meet that increased need with food sources rather than supplements. And this is just due to the higher risk for contamination of supplements, as we've learned with the Dietary Supplement and Health Education Act. The last one, fat. There's no real specific recommendation for fat that is different from the dietary guidelines for Americans, but there should still be an emphasis on essential fatty acids, including our omega-3 fatty acids. Now, we'll see that there are some limitations to how much fish and seafood should be consumed during pregnancy, but it's still allowed in a certain amount. So those fish and seafood can be used to meet those essential fatty acid needs. This graph is just going to show the increased nutrient needs during pregnancy. So you can see for energy during pregnancy and lactation, energy is going to be increased. Protein, we can see that there's a significant increase in protein needs. And then also for our micronutrients, we can see a slight increase in pregnancy for vitamin A, but very large for lactation. And then iron is the one that you'll want to know for the final exam, right? And the main reason for this is this very high increase in iron need during pregnancy is not easily going to be met by dietary measures alone. And so it is recommended to meet iron needs during pregnancy that the pregnant woman takes iron supplements. And iron is included in most prenatal or pregnancy multivitamins that are prescribed by a physician or bought over the counter. Now we can look at some of the micronutrients of concern in pregnancy, one of them being folate. Now, you should be familiar with the role or function of folate in the body. Uh, and what we've learned so far is that it is connected to neural tube defects. So, having adequate folate status prior to becoming pregnant and in the very early stages of pregnancy helps to minimize the risk of neural tube defects. Neural tube defects, the two common ones, are anencephaly and spina bifida. Anencephaly is when the baby does not have the development of a brain, and spina bifida is when there's an incomplete closure of the spinal cord. And this, of course, can have physical effects, and in some instances, going to have mental or cognitive effects as well. Interesting thing about neural tube defects is that they occur in the first month of pregnancy, and this is often before the woman knows she is pregnant. So here, this really comes back to the importance of establishing healthful eating behaviors prior to becoming pregnant. And what that hints at is prevention. Prevention is key. So how do we do that with folate? We ensure we have a regular intake of folate-rich foods, things like lentils, beans, greens, and avocados. Another thing that has been helpful, and we've talked about before in this class, is the enrichment of grain products. So for folate or folic acid, that became law in 1998. And with this law, with any refined flour, it's required to add back in 140 micrograms of folic acid per 100 grams. So this is put into place to ensure that the folate status of Americans is good. And that's helpful because a lot of women who become pregnant were not planning to do so. Nevertheless, it is recommended for anyone who is planning to become pregnant to take a folic acid supplement, and the recommendation is to take 400 micrograms per day. This is another one that's going to become come standard in any prenatal supplement that is prescribed by a physician or bought over the counter. Oh, well, if you can hear some screaming, there's somebody screaming outside my window. I'm not sure why. So this is spina bifida. This is the condition I mentioned where there's an incomplete closure of the spinal cord. Now there can be this manifestation on the infant's back where you see this lump, and that is just an incomplete closure. And there are varying degrees of spina bifida, from very mild to very severe. And on the severe side, you're going to have severe physical and cognitive limitations. Other nutrients of concern, one may be vitamin B12. And as we know that a high intake of folic acid can mask a B12 deficiency, and that's one of the greatest concerns with fortification. So if somebody's consuming a high amount of folic acid in their grain products, and then they're taking a folic acid supplement on top of there, it may mask early signs of vitamin B12 deficiency. Now, as we know, this is not usually an issue when eating animal products. So strict vegans or vegetarians should pay careful attention to their vitamin B12 status, and then also those with increased risk of malabsorption. So anyone who is poorly absorbing B12. And the risk factors for that are beyond the scope of this course. Another nutrient would be vitamin D and calcium. So calcium absorption actually doubles during pregnancy, and so the RDA is the same. So you can consume the same amount and try to reach the RDA, but the body is going to become much more efficient at absorbing that calcium. And for vitamin D, of course, you're going to have adequate vitamin D status to ensure that happens. Now, why is calcium so important? Right? Well, maybe because you're creating a new human inside you that is going to have some bones, right? And our bones are primarily made up of calcium, so we're going to need that calcium to come from somewhere. And you don't want it to come from the mother. Iron. So with pregnancy, iron becomes very important. So during pregnancy, menstruation ceases and absorption increases. So this shows the importance of iron, right? So the pregnant woman is not going to be losing iron in their period, and they're also going to be more efficient at absorbing it, like they are with calcium. This one does have an increase in the RDA, so it increases from 18 to 27. In order to achieve this, you want to choose foods that supply heme iron, right? The iron from animal products that is well absorbed. If you're getting most of your iron from non-heme, then you want to consume it with vitamin C to enhance absorption. And finally, you want to consider a daily iron supplement of about 30 milligrams, and most prenatal supplements will contain this. Now, for each of these nutrients, as I alluded to with calcium, the transfer to the fetus is going to take priority. So, right, you're going to give your iron, you're going to give your calcium to the fetus, and that's going to come at the dismay of the mother. So, really poor intake of calcium during pregnancy is going to accelerate bone loss, right? If the fetus is going to have to draw on the mother stores, and the same thing with iron. If there's really poor iron intake, then the iron status of the mother is going to suffer. And of course, this is going to be harmful once the baby is born. Since meeting these nutrient needs is very important for the health of not just the mother but also the infant, there are various government programs that assist in helping pregnant mothers and new mothers to have adequate access to food. And the first one here is the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, also called WIC. This is a program that has a food component, so it provides money for food. It also has an education component, so there's education on appropriate nutrition, there's education on breastfeeding, and then there's a referral service. So people at WIC can make referrals to the necessary health and social services to ensure that the new mother, the pregnant mother, and the infant all have the appropriate services that they need. Another food assistance program is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also called SNAP, and this is what is commonly referred to as food stamps. So it's money that is allotted to the family each month to go towards food. And both of these programs are income-based. So in order to qualify for these programs, you have to earn a certain amount of money. And once you exceed that certain threshold, then you are no longer eligible to receive the assistance from the government. Now, we talked about weight gain briefly in one of the slides. And so weight gain is a necessary part of pregnancy. Women must gain weight. The benefits of appropriate weight gain include a greater chance of having a healthful birth weight, having a healthful baby. The desired pattern of weight gain is going to be determined by the pre-pregnancy BMI and also by the number of fetuses. So if you're going to have twins or triplets, obviously you're going to need to gain more weight. And we'll see how the BMI shakes out, but basically, right, depending on where you are on our BMI stratification that we've learned, is going to determine what an appropriate weight gain is going to look like for you. Lastly, the ideal weight gain pattern for a normal weight adult, so somebody who falls in this normal BMI range, in quotations, normal always. So for the first trimester, weight gain of 3.5 pounds is expected, and then from there on out, 1 pound per week. This is the stratification that I was talking about, right? With BMI, we have our underweight, we have our healthy weight, we have our overweight, and our obese, and you should know these ranges. And with these, we have recommendations for weight gain. So in underweight, the recommended weight gain is 28 to 40 pounds. For healthy weight, it's 25 to 35 pounds. For overweight, it's 15 to 25 pounds. And then for obese, even when somebody is considered obese, they are still supposed to gain weight, 11 to 20 pounds. Now, you don't need to know these numbers here on the right for twin birth, but for single birth, I want you guys to know these numbers because on the exam, I may ask you, Alicia is a 28-year-old female with a BMI of 28. How much weight should she gain during her pregnancy? And so you'll have to know 15 to 25 pounds. Where does this weight come from? Now, of course, there's going to be some weight that is going to come from a baby, right? You can have a baby that weighs 7.5 pounds inside you, so that's going to contribute to weight. We've learned about the temporary organ of the placenta, that's going to contribute some weight. You have the amniotic fluid that's keeping that baby contained and cushioned, that's going to contribute to weight. And so there's plenty of areas where the weight comes from. Now, up here in the breast, there's going to be an increase in breast size, an increase in mother's fluid volume. So there's also the increase in muscle that we've mentioned. So there's just a bunch of natural increases throughout the body that are contributing to weight. It's not all coming from new fat mass, although there is a slight increase in fat mass that does occur. Weight loss during pregnancy is not recommended under any circumstances, So even if the rate of weight gain is advanced. So we saw in that first trimester, it's recommended that there's a 3.5 pound weight gain. If somebody gains 8 pounds, you're not going to have them drop back down weight to get back on track. There may be an instance of somebody is rapidly gaining weight that you slow that weight gain down, but in no circumstance are you going to have them start going the other way. Weight loss after pregnancy, there's going to be some losses at delivery and in the weeks after that are inevitable. So we saw where that weight gain came from. When you lose the fetus, the placenta, the amniotic fluid, obviously you're going to lose that weight with it. In the weeks after pregnancy, there's going to be a normalization of the blood volume and the fluid status. And then if somebody participates in breastfeeding, there are strategies to maximize loss of fat stores with that. So breastfeeding can be a good strategy to returning to pre-pregnancy weight. And it is normal to retain a few pounds after pregnancy. Should pregnant women be physically active? The answer is yes. There are many benefits of physical activity that have been shown with pregnancy. So active women report fewer discomfort. Physical activity helps to manage psychological stress and weight. So there's a lot of stress that goes on with being pregnant, preparing for your first child or a new child, and also with having to deal with the changes going on in the body, including increase in weight and fat mass. Finally, the benefits of physical activity is that they help to prevent gestational diabetes, which we'll see as a temporary, can become permanent, but most often a temporary decrease in the ability to manage blood sugar while pregnant. The types of activities that are recommended during pregnancy: low impact exercise, so brisk walking, stationary bike riding, swimming, yoga, weightlifting, right? Things that are not putting the fetus at risk. Things that should be avoided are those that put the fetus at risk. So contact sports, activities with high risk of falls. You should never have a pregnant woman go skiing, snowboarding, bicycling outdoors, basketball, wrestling. All those things are putting the mother and the fetus at risk. Now, some of you may laugh at the notion that somebody who is pregnant is going to wrestle or go skiing, but they have to put these recommendations out there for a reason, meaning that people have done it in the past. So guidelines are, or the goal is to prevent dehydration and prevent undesirable increase of internal temperature. So some guidelines using a chart from our book. So exercise regularly, do a light warm up, 30 minutes or more of moderate physical activity, cool down and include some gentle stretching, drink water before, during, and after exercise to help stay hydrated and prevent those undesirable increases in body temperature. Eat enough to support the additional needs of pregnancy and get adequate rest. Things that you don't want to do: exercise vigorously, exercise in hot, humid weather, exercise when sick. Uh, this is a one that if any of you are certified personal trainers, you always need to know when you take a personal training exam. Exercising while lying on your back after the first trimester is not something that you want to do. Not exercising if you experience any pain or discomfort. Activities that harm the abdomen or involve jerky, bouncing movements. And the last one, don't scuba dive. And again, right, you never imagine that someone who's pregnant would do this, but they have to put it in there for a reason, meaning that somebody's probably done it. Just like how you saw this week, if you've been following the news, how many organizations had to come out and say that you shouldn't drink bleach or you shouldn't inject bleach into your bloodstream. Now, for most individuals, we know that it's not something that you want to do, but they have to do it because unfortunately there are people out there who are willing to believe that is something that may be helpful in ridding themselves of the coronavirus or helping them prevent from getting it. Some cautions for the pregnant woman: smoking and drugs, don't do it, and also stay off the weed. This is a shout out to Stephen A. Smith on ESPN, who always tells athletes to stay off the weed. It's not going to be useful to a pregnant woman. In addition to this, you want to monitor for environmental tobacco smoke, so secondhand smoke can be detrimental. When it comes to medicinal drugs and herbal supplements, you'll always want to stick with what is prescribed by your physician and be wary of any herbal supplements, dietary supplements that have not been approved by your doctor. So you always want to remember the implications of that act that we've talked about so many times that create loopholes for supplements to not be well regulated. This you want to star and know for the final exam. The last bit, environmental contaminants. So things like lead and mercury can be detrimental. Lead, if you ensure adequate calcium intake, that can help to offset any intake of lead. For mercury, this is where the concern with fish and seafood occurs. So you can still include seafood and fish 8 to 12 ounces per week. With the seafood, the Food and Drug Administration and the Environmental Protection Agency release guidelines for pregnant women. Now, I think this is for pregnant women, but this might be a good guideline for anyone just to minimize intake of mercury, which can be detrimental to people whether they're pregnant or not. So there are best choices, right? These are going to have the lowest amounts of mercury. You can see some common ones like shrimp. Tilapia is common in food production. Salmon is very common. Oysters, cod is common in food production as well. There's some good choices here. Right? Bluefish is common here on Long Island, and tuna, of course. The tunas are very commonly eaten. Foods to avoid, things like shark, swordfish, marlin are all considered to have high mercury levels. one thing that you'll notice is that uh, these fish, right, sharks, swordfish, marlin, they're all very big fish, and so they probably get high mercury levels from eating smaller fish. Other cautions for the pregnant woman: foodborne illness. So you want to practice food safety guidelines to minimize risk of getting sick from the food that you eat. Some things to do are to choose only pasteurized juice and dairy. Pasteurized is a food processing that heats the food at very high temperatures to destroy any bacteria that may be in it. Most juices and dairy products that you can buy in the store are pasteurized, but if you buy food from a local farmer's market, it may not be. For animal proteins, you want to make sure they're cooked thoroughly to destroy any harmful bacteria, and you'll want to wash all fruits and vegetables thoroughly. Careful to avoid vitamin and mineral overdoses, right? Especially pregnant women who may be taking vitamin and mineral supplement at the advice of their physician. So we learned that you can get too much with some of these supplements, and the one that we've always come back to is vitamin A. The final piece here is just to be wary of restrictive diets, right? Some of the diets that we all know about may lack vital nutrients, they may limit weight gain, and pregnancy is not really the best time to try keto, carnivore, go vegan. It's a time to um, really make sure that nutrition is on point and you're getting the adequate nutrients. And usually with all of these things, keto or vegan diet, there's a transition period where the person is learning the appropriate things to do. They're trying different things. And it's probably not the best idea to be experimenting and trying to learn something new when you have a life at risk. The cautions continue. We have caffeine and alcohol. So some people think that you can't have caffeine at all while pregnant. Looking at the research, there's inconclusive results. It seems that with greater than 300 milligrams of caffeine per day, there may be possible harm, so it's best to play it safe. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends less than 200 milligrams per day. So this comes out to approximately 2 cups or 16 ounces of standard coffee. Standard would just be like taking a normal blend and making it as a drip. It would not apply to something like Starbucks, which has very higher um, amounts of caffeine. So if you get your coffee from a uh, common place like Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, then the information about the estimated caffeine content will be available on their website, and you'll want to check. But 200 milligrams is about 2 cups of or 16 ounces of standard coffee. You also want to know that caffeine is found in soda, tea, and dark chocolate. So you'll want to account for that if you can. So I know caffeine is on the final exam, so you should make a star of that. Alcohol, just like our smoking, don't do this. The effects of alcohol are dose dependent, meaning the more alcohol the pregnant woman drinks, the more severe the negative effects are going to be on the fetus. And with alcohol, we have something called fetal alcohol syndrome. And this produces a wide range of physical, behavioral, and cognitive deficits in the child. There are 3 complications of pregnancy that you'll want to be aware of. The first one is gestational diabetes, and I mentioned this briefly before. So, this is a period of poor blood sugar control during pregnancy. Typically resolves after birth, but can persist, and the woman can have diabetes after giving birth. So, with gestational diabetes, it leads to an increased risk of having to have a surgical birth, a stillbirth, or a high birth weight, which are things that you don't want to have. And women who have gestational diabetes have a higher rate of obesity and diabetes long term. The second one, gestational hypertension, so high blood pressure. This typically resolves after birth, and it poses risk to the mother and fetus. So the mother with hypertension can have heart attack or stroke, and with the fetus, it can lead to growth restriction, preterm birth. The third complication that we learn about in this course is called preeclampsia, and this is characterized by the high blood pressure and also proteinuria, and this is when you have protein in your urine. So this typically appears after 20 weeks of pregnancy, and it starts to disappear shortly after delivery. It requires immediate medical attention because it stresses all of the mother's major organs, and it can result in seizures. So at that point, once the seizure occurs, it is classified as eclampsia. So the cure, right, if somebody has preeclampsia, is to have the baby. The warning signs for preeclampsia: hypertension, that proteinuria, or protein in the urine, upper abdominal pain, severe and constant headaches, swelling, especially of the face, dizziness, blurred vision, and sudden weight gain. Now, checking protein in the urine, I don't believe is a standard operation, but if a woman who is pregnant presents with hypertension, then they are probably going to check the protein in the urine as well to ensure that, or to check for preeclampsia. All right, so that is it for the complications, and that brings us into lactation or milk production. So, milk production, breastfeeding is a natural process, but it's not just something you do, it's something you learn. So, lactation is a skill that requires preparation before birth. So, mothers are advised to educate themselves by reading books. There are certified lactation consultants, which are professionals to assist in lactation. And then there's also specific nutrient requirements or recommendations for lactation. So it's important to learn about those as well. With proper preparation, most women can breastfeed. Insufficient milk production is rare. There are warning signs though, and that would be dry diapers. So with a healthful, well-nourished, well-hydrated infant, there should be wet diapers 6 to 8 times per day. And you check the diapers, right? Because with breastfeeding, you're not able to see exactly how much the baby is consuming. If it's latched onto a breath, it's not like a bottle where you can measure exactly how much they consume. If the child is latching onto the breast to breastfeed, they may be sucking but not getting much. So nutrition during lactation, there is an energy cost. So, right, it increases the nutrient needs, and that's about 500 calories per day above a woman's need for weight maintenance. One of the recommendations to assist in getting back to pre-pregnancy weight is, instead of getting all 500 of those calories, to consume an additional 330 calories. And with that, the additional 170 is going to be drawn from the woman's maternal fat stores. And so this is that strategy I mentioned that can help with breastfeeding and getting rid of some body fat, returning to pre-pregnancy weight. There's going to be increased fluid needs with lactation because the breast milk is made with water from the mother. And the recommendation is about 13 cups per day. Variations in breast milk, the composition of it, is usually small variations. So our diet usually affects our milk quantity instead of the quality of it. And the reason for this is because the body is going to deliver nutrients at the expense of maternal stores. So the body is going to draw whatever it can from the mother to give to the infant. So for instance, even if the mother's diet is insufficient or inadequate in calcium, right? It's going to pull on the mother's calcium stores in order to deliver it to the fetus, or to the infant, rather, at this point, since the baby is born. When should a woman not breastfeed? If they use alcohol or illicit drugs. So alcohol concentration peaks within 1 hour, and this is going to affect the composition, production, and taste. So unlike when they're pregnant and they're not recommended to consume alcohol at all, uh, people who are breastfeeding can create a plan for when they're going to deliver breast milk and consume alcohol around that. So say they can produce a bunch of breast milk to last the rest of the day, and they have everything that they need, then they can consume alcohol since they won't be having to deliver any breast milk for that time. Illicit drug users should not breastfeed. So if you are participating in any illicit drug use, you are discouraged. The use of tobacco, nicotine, and high doses of caffeine can affect the composition of breast milk, and certain medications. So we don't go into any detail here, but there's going to be different danger with different medications and how much is taken. And so it's always important to consult a physician if you have any unique medications that you're taking. With maternal illness, if somebody has the common cold, it's okay to feed normally. With something like tuberculosis, once it's treated, it's okay. HIV can actually be transmitted to the infant through breastfeeding. Uh, so, if there is adequate resources and access to formula feeding, that is the preferred route for somebody with HIV/AIDS. But the World Health Organization says that breastfeeding may be the safer route in some developing nations, right? If there's not adequate access to food or clean water, then the breastfeeding might actually be the better route. So that's interesting. In terms of feeding the infant, right? Infants have very fast metabolisms, very high nutrient needs. The growth rate is fastest in the first year of life. The metabolic rate is going to be 2 times that of an adult. So you can see in this first year of life, there's rapid weight gain and development, and then it gets shorter and shorter as the years go on. So in terms of nutrient needs, they're going to be much higher per pound. And just for reference, in an infant, we're looking at about an energy need of 100 calories per pound compared to the average adult, which is going to need about 30 calories per pound. So the infant is not going to need, it doesn't have higher energy needs in total number of calories, but when we look at it on a per pound basis, they have much higher energy needs. And this is reflected here. So you can see the energy needs are much higher. It's also going to be reflected in most vitamins and minerals. So you can see the ones that are highlighted here are vitamin D. So the recommendations of an infant are almost 7 times per pound of body weight than those of the adult male. And for this reason, with breastfeeding, it is recommended to have a vitamin D supplement, and we'll see that soon. Just the other one highlighted here is niacin, and you can see that there's not much of a difference, so that would be an exception. Continuing with feeding the infant, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics recommend exclusive breastfeeding for about the first 6 months. And then after that time period, you want to do breastfeeding and complementary foods up to 1 year before transitioning to an all food diet. The energy nutrient balance of milk is what most experts call a perfect formula for infants, right? It has everything that they need in the appropriate amounts, and those needs are going to differ from adults. So Compared to adults, infants are going to have lower protein and more fat in terms of percentage of total calories. The vitamins and minerals in breast milk, there's going to be ample amounts of all of them except vitamin D. And for this reason, when an infant is exclusively breastfeed, it's recommended that a vitamin D supplement is added in. This is also recommended for those drinking less than 32 ounces of vitamin D fortified formula. The benefits of breastfeeding include immune factors from the mother. So this helps to build the baby's immunity and protect against viral and bacterial infections. You're not going to get this with formula feeding. Other potential benefits, both short and long term, breastfed infants experience fewer allergic reactions. They have less ear and respiratory infections. As that infant turns into a child and continues to grow older, even into an adult, lower rates of overweight and obesity. And then also with breastfeeding, it's going to be more cost effective because you don't have to buy formula. And then it's also going to have a less of an environmental impact. With formula feeding, you're going to have to buy all the bottles and stuff. The bottles, the formula can, all the things that come with formula feeding. Speaking of formula feeding, it is an acceptable alternative to breastfeeding. So you can meet all the energy and nutrient requirements of breastfeeding through formula feeding. One of the advantages of formula feeding is that it allows various individuals to feed and bond. So instead of just the mother being able to feed, it gives an opportunity for dad, grandma, grandpa to hold the baby and bond with it. It also allows for parents to see how much is consumed. So if the baby is feeding from the nipple of the mother, you're not able to see how much is consumed, but with a bottle you can track. Some disadvantages, right? It's more expensive, it leads to increased waste, and it does not have those immune factors that I mentioned before. So it's important to understand that infant formulas are specially formulated to mimic breast milk. And the American Academy of Pediatrics says that cow's milk is not appropriate in the first year of life. The reason for this, it is too low in iron and too high in calcium, and it should only be introduced once 2/3 of the daily energy needs can be met by food. Now we see what this looks like. We have breast milk, 6% protein, 55% fat, 39% carbohydrate. The infant formulas are designed to mimic this the best they can. And you can see that cow's milk is not an acceptable alternative to breast milk. It's 20% protein, 51% fat, and 29% carbohydrates. So as adults, right, we like our protein. But here, choosing the higher protein option is not going to be in the best interest of the infant. So we're breastfeeding for the first about 6 months, and then we're continually monitoring the baby's ability to take food by mouth. So infants are generally ready to take food by mouth between 4 and 6 months. And the first food that's recommended is an iron fortified cereal. The iron fortified cereals, low risk for allergic reaction, and because they're iron fortified, they provide much needed iron that cannot be met through the breast milk. Considerations, nutrient needs. So you want to target foods that are rich in nutrients that the infant may not be getting enough of with their breast milk. Iron, zinc, and vitamin C are 3 examples. Obviously, you want to keep an eye on the infant's physical readiness to be able to take the solid foods. Do they have the swallowing ability to do that? And then you also want to detect and control any allergic reactions. So it's recommended to introduce single ingredient foods one at a time. So you don't want to give a multi-ingredient or multi-foods to an infant at one time, because if they do have some kind of allergic reaction, you're not going to be able to know exactly which component of that meal or of that food that you gave them, unless you give them all to the baby again. So one thing at a time. Here are the development and recommended foods to go along with it. And you can go through this on your own time in detail, but 4 to 6 months, they begin the chewing action, they bring hand to mouth, and so you can start giving them things like iron fortified cereal. You can give them some pureed meats, pureed beans, vegetables, and fruits. As they begin to approach 1 year, they'll start doing things like holding their own bottle, reaching for and grabbing food or a spoon, sitting unsupported. And so from then, they can start eating more hand foods, start using utensils if they can, and start gradually approaching, finely cut and chopped foods, soft foods. And then by 10 to 12, you see mastering the spoon, but still spill some. And so at this point, you start adding variety and gradually increasing portion sizes. So by 1 year, foods from all groups should be included, focusing on the principles of variety, balance, and moderation. Things that should be omitted or avoided in the diet of infant, things like baby desserts, sugar alcohols, an example being sorbitol, which can lead to GI stress, diarrhea, salted canned foods, honey, and bottles as a pacifier. So if you have a finicky baby, a crying baby, you don't want to use the bottle as something to calm them down, because that can lead to increased risk of dental caries by having constant exposure of sugar to the teeth, but also to an increased energy intake leading to overweight or obesity. Now, honey can be is something that should be avoided because it can be contaminated with botulism, a bacteria that can be very detrimental, and the baby is not going to be able to withstand. So, mealtime with infants, you want to foster a sense of autonomy, make the infant feel like they're in control. Feeding guidelines, you want to discourage unacceptable behavior. Right, babies are going to be messy, but you don't want to allow things like throwing food. With young children, you want to let them explore and enjoy food. So, like, in addition to being messy, right, they're going to get things all over their face, they're going to eat with their fingers, and all of these things should be allowed. And the last thing, you don't want to force food on children. So, uh, creating scenarios where you say you can't do X until you eat Y and Z can lead to bad relationship with food and further issues down the road. That brings us to the end of chapter 13. So now I'm going to exit out of this. And let's see if I can grab chapter 14 here. So chapter 14 is going to be a little bit shorter. It is going to be 25 slides, I believe. And so we're going to pick up where we left off with our 1-year-olds, and it's going to take us from after the first year of life, and then we're going to look at our teenage years. We skipped the adult years since we've done those throughout the semester, and we're just going to do some specific uh, topics for the older adult or elderly. So here we'll look at dietary recommendations for early childhood and middle childhood. We'll look at the nutrient needs of adolescents or teenagers. We'll look at the factors associated with successful and healthy aging. And then we'll look at the nutrient needs of our older adults, so ages 65 and above. So after that first year, we're in our second year. we have a child, and there are rapid changes occurring. So dietary changes that occur with the young child. So they are transitioning from breast milk or formula into a diet that is going to be composed of adult foods. And the goal is to align the food choices close to the food of adults, right? And that is an important thing, to lead by example. So the adults should have healthful, well-rounded diets, and they should be passing those things by leading by example down to their children. In this period of early childhood, there's tremendous amount of growth. So there'll be greater bone density, increased muscle mass, and increased coordination. There will be appetite changes. So in early childhood, there's a fluctuation between being insatiable and having no appetite. Meaning insatiable is you never get full, you just keep on eating. So this is considered a normal process that will balance out if enough food is available to the child when they are hungry. So you're going to experience periods of extreme hunger, periods of no hunger. The goal is just to make sure that food is available and not freak out if your child does not eat anything. Just wait till the next mealtime and offer them food. So we can see changes of the body. We now got our nice cute little baby butt here, and they start losing some of that little baby fat. You know, they grow taller, they get more muscle mass, and they're more coordinated. These are not pictures of me. Feeding a healthy young child, the energy needs are going to vary widely, and that's going to depend on their growth and physical activity, right? Children are going to grow at different paces, and they're going to have different levels of physical activity. Something like a vegan diet is not recommended for a healthy young child. Doesn't mean it doesn't occur, and it doesn't always work out, or isn't always harmful. Like some people can get away with it. But it is generally not recommended because it may inhibit the child from getting enough energy, right? Vegan diets generally focus on nutrient-dense foods, those that have a lot of vitamins and minerals but are low in calories. And so if a child is eating fruits and vegetables as their primary source of food, then they may not get enough total calories at a time where they have very high nutrient needs or energy needs per pound. In terms of protein, the needs of a child are slightly higher in grams per kilogram versus adults. So for males aged 1 to 3, the recommendation is for 1.05 gram per kilogram per day. And as we've learned in this course, this is not a nutrient of concern for Americans. Americans do a good job of getting their protein in. So you can see on the right here how males and females, and then by age you have specific energy recommendations, and of course those are going to be increased if you're active. Now some of you guys will look at this, right, and think back to your diet analysis projects, right? You can look at a 12 to 13-year-old sedentary female, 1600, active one, 2200. So there may be a recommendation for a 12-year-old to have as many calories as a lot of you guys consume now. And the main reason for that, 12 to 13-year-olds, is going to be a period of rapid growth, puberty, the onset of puberty. So moving along, carbohydrate and fiber. So the glucose used by the brain is similar in a 1-year-old versus an adult. Fiber recommendations are tailored to age. So you can see those recommendations here on the right-hand side. For fat and fatty acid, this of course is going to be expressed as percent of total calories. And you can see that it is different from the adult recommendation that we've learned. So 1 to 3 years old, 30 to 40% of total calories from fat, and 4 to 18-year-olds, 25 to 35% of total calories from fat. There are numerous resources available to help kids eat healthfully, one of them being My Plate for Kids. And so, if you have children of your own, this might be something that you want to check out. You can go to MyPlate, choose myplate.gov and find My Plate for Kids, and they have a whole bunch of activities to try to make eating and nutrition fun for your children. Now, why is this important? Well, the eating patterns developed as a child is going to have implications for eating habits as an adult. And also, it's important to learn this stuff and pass it on to children because the U.S. children's food intakes are not the best right now. As a whole, United States children consume too few fruits and vegetables. French fries are the number one vegetable. Bananas are the number one fruit. Generally, not enough vitamins and minerals, lacking in things like vitamin E and vitamin D, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and fiber. Most of these, right, found in plant-based foods. And then, in addition to this, there's an excess of added sugar and dietary fat. Children are going to have unique needs and preferences, so there's various strategies that can be used to make sure that those needs and preferences are met. In terms of flavor and temperature, you want to serve food warm and mild, not wild, like I was starting to say. Warm and mild, not hot and spicy. And the reason for this is that the children's mouths are more sensitive. You want to establish appropriate portion sizes. So, as part of this, you want to avoid large portion sizes of all foods because if there's one food on the plate that the children likes and there's a very large portion size, they're just going to eat that one food and fill up on that while ignoring the others. Children often have what's called food neophobia, so that's a fear of new foods. And when this happens, you'll want to continue to offer it even if it is rejected at first. So if you're trying to introduce green beans into a child's diet, you give it to them once, they don't like it, and then you give it to it. You accept that without judgment, you try to give it to them next time. And the more exposure the child has to it, the more likely they are to consume it. You want to serve new foods first when the child is hungry. So if the child has a very big appetite, it's a good time to try a new food because if they're hungry, they're more likely to eat what is in front of them. And then the last bit, set an example for the child. So in the example of green beans, if mom and dad only eat hamburgers and french fries and they're trying to get their kid to eat green beans, well, the kid is smart enough to say, all right, what the heck's going on here? So if you want a child to eat more vegetables, more fruits, try healthful foods, it's important to show that you eat those foods and you enjoy them. There's something called a food jag. This is when a child goes on a streak where they're only eating one food or a very small group of food items, meal after meal. There are strategies for managing food jags. So at first, you don't want to draw attention to it and allow it up to 2 weeks. So if the child only wants to eat macaroni and cheese meal after meal, you don't want to cause a scene about it right away. You can allow it up to 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, you can be again serving small portions of many foods, including the desired food. So you could have a little bit of mac and cheese, but you're also going to serve some green beans. You're going to serve some roasted chicken. You're going to serve some applesauce, and so they can still get their food that they've been on a kick with, but they're also getting exposed to different foods. The last thing here, honoring feelings of fullness. So strategies such as enforcing a clean plate can lead to overeating and develop undesirable habits. So if a child says that they're full and they don't want to eat anymore, you don't want to force them to eat more. Some ways to optimize eating patterns in children when it comes to snacking. There are many children who will snack so much that they get full, um, and so they won't be ready to eat at meal times. So it's important to build timed healthy snacks around meal times. When it comes to eating at restaurants, uh, portion sizes are often much larger than the child is going to need. So consider splitting meals. And if there's no kid menu available, you can order appetizers, soups, salads, and side dishes as the main meal instead of ordering from the list of entrees. At the bottom here, one way to optimize eating patterns is to help develop food skills. So you want to involve children in all stages of food preparation. So if children participate in finding recipes, going shopping, seeing the food, helping to pick the food, come home and helping to prepare it and cook and serve the food, it's more likely that they will become adults that are able to do those things, and it's also more likely that they'll try a wide range of foods if they're made a part of the whole process. So it's good to make food a family affair. And here are various food skills along with ages. So you can see in 1 to 2 years, um, they're not really able to do much in terms of helping out in the kitchen, but by 3, they can help to wrap, pour, mix, shake, stir, or spread foods, and they can follow simple instructions. Uh, and then 4 years old, they can help to measure dry ingredients, they can learn table manners. 5 years old, measuring liquids, help grind, grate, and cut, and use hand mixer with supervision. So there's, um, by age, there's different ways that different skills that the child has, and in terms of assisting in food preparation, there's different things that they can do. Nutrient deficiencies and toxicities in children. There are some nutrients of concern that are not going to be very different for infants and adults. So those would be vitamin D, calcium, and iron. There should be special attention paid to lead. Uh, Children, especially young children, as they start being able to crawl and walk, may get into things that you don't want them to. May eat things like old paint, soil, and these things can be high in lead. Lead poisoning can cause irreversible physical and cognitive damages, and it also competes with iron, calcium, and zinc for absorption. So it will be important to ensure adequate amounts of those nutrients are available, and by doing so, they can decrease the absorption of lead if that is being consumed as well. This brings us to adolescence, so the teenage years. Nutrition in adolescence is going to be influenced by parents, peers, and the media. Family meals are associated with higher diet quality, so people who eat as a family, eat at home, tend to have better diets. In adolescence, right, we have puberty, and growth spurts are going to affect nutrient needs. So with girls, this is going to begin at 10 or 11 and peak at 12. And for boys, it's going to begin a little bit later, 12 or 13, and end later, peak at 14. Energy needs are going to vary widely based on growth rate, sex, body composition, and level of physical activity. And so if you think about an active 14-year-old male versus sedentary 14-year-old female, they're going to have very different energy needs. The demand for vitamins, minerals, and energy yielding nutrients are generally greater during adolescence than any other time of life, except for pregnancy and lactation. Now, who is an adolescent? The World Health Organization defines an adolescent as any person aged 10 to 19. So that's the period we're talking about. The eating patterns of adolescents, They often change for the worse at this time period. So adolescents are known for skipping breakfast, choosing fewer fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, and drinking more soft drinks. During this time period, they may also begin drinking alcohol. As an adolescent, they're still influenced by the habits of adults. We consider the adults as gatekeepers, meaning they control the access to food. So, again, important to set an example as an adult. Important to keep nutritious snacks around the home so that if the adolescent is hungry, the food that they're able to get to are nutritious. And important to deliver nutrition information at teachable moments. So, say Uncle Frank has been diagnosed with diabetes and is at risk of a heart attack, that may be a teachable moment for an adolescent to tell them how important it is to control their overall energy intake and how important it is to stay physically active. Adolescents are likely to respond to teachable moments like this. And that brings us into our later years, so 65 plus years old. Some characteristics of those who reach an old age, they tend to be non-smokers. They either abstain from alcohol or they consume alcohol in moderation with the guidelines that we've learned. They meet physical activity guidelines. They have diets that are high in fruits and vegetables, and they maintain a healthful body weight throughout the lifespan. So these are just some characteristics when you look at research of people who live the longest. These are some of the things that they tend to do. So nutrition in the later years, needs remain individualized in advanced age. Our needs are influenced by our genetics and our past medical history. So when we think about our needs, we think about age, we always have to consider the difference between our chronological age and our biological age. The chronological age is what the calendar says our age is, right? If you're born in 1990, you're going to turn 30 this year at some point, or you already turned 30. That's your chronological age. Your biological age is going to be how old you are based off your lived experience. So, right, a 65-year-old who has diabetes, COPD, is obese, is going to be considered to have a higher biological age than someone who's 10 years older at 75, who is a normal weight, physical activity, and is physically active and doesn't have any past medical history. So those when we're dealing with the elderly, you always want to consider the difference between someone's chronological age and their biological age. In terms of energy recommendations, they often decrease with age. And so as we get older, there's a decline in basal metabolic rate. This can be partly attributed to sarcopenia, which is the age-related losses to lean muscle tissue. We know that our muscle tissue is very metabolically active. As we get older, there's a natural decline in that muscle tissue, and so naturally our metabolic rate goes down. In terms of body mass index for the elderly, with ages 70 plus, a BMI of 25 to 32 may actually be optimal and desirable. And so, in this age group, weight loss is generally not recommended. Physical changes in the later years that affect nutrition include changes to the digestive tract. So you start losing um, you start losing motility, you start um, losing absorptive capacity through decreased acid production, and so that becomes an issue. There's overall decline in hormone secretion, so you're more likely to have an exacerbation or worsening of blood sugar control. in the mouth, tooth loss, difficulty swallowing, all can become issues. Sensory organs, so changes to sight, smell, hearing. And then in body composition, as we've already talked about, with sarcopenia, there's lower energy requirements. Protein needs in the elderly. There's research showing that a slight increase seems to be desirable. Uh, One thing to note is that when it comes to protein, intake may be limited by chewing and swallowing. Right? If those changes in the mouth that we saw, it might not be as easy to chew things like chicken breast or steak. So it's good for the elderly to focus on soft sources like eggs, yogurt, and beans. For carbohydrates and fiber, important to choose fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. And this is because it can help to avoid constipation with sluggish GI motility. So things are not moving through as well. And so elderly can become constipated. With fats, there's no unique requirements, so no difference from what we've learned in the course with adults. Some nutrient concerns: vitamin D. As we age, the synthesis in the skin declines, so they're at increased risk of D deficiency. They will also be at increased risk of vitamin B12 and iron deficiency, and this can be attributed to a decline in stomach acid production. One last nutrient concern is water, and as people age, they have a decreased sensation for thirst, and so they're at an increased risk of becoming dehydrated. And this, of course, can have negative consequences in its own. It's also going to increase risk of pressure injuries and contribute to or exacerbate an altered mental status. And so, from my experience reading medical charts, I know that in some nursing homes and rehab centers, they have water that is prescribed almost as a medication. So it pops up on the nurse's computer that they need to administer water because these elderly individuals are not likely to seek out fluid on their own. And so it needs to be encouraged in order for them to do it. Food choices of older adults. There are some obstacles to adequacy: living situation, physical limitations. So they may live by themselves and have issues cooking food. They may have physical limitations that prevent them from shopping or cooking. Older individuals often deal with loneliness and depression, so this, of course, can affect nutritional status for the worse. And then older individuals are more likely to be facing chronic diseases and things like Alzheimer's disease, where there's uh, altered mental status. This can, of course, impact the ability to shop and cook, but also is going to impact ability to self-feed and appetite. Certain programs do help. We have SNAP. Individuals who are elderly can be eligible for SNAP. And then there's one called Meals on Wheels. And research has shown that people who are part of Meals on Wheels experience improved diet quality, increased nutrient intakes, reduced food insecurity, and improved quality of life. So this is a program that helps to deliver meals to the elderly right at their home. So predictors of malnutrition in elderly, we have this acronym called DETERMINE. So things that can predict malnutrition: if somebody has a disease, if they've been eating poorly already, if they have tooth loss or mouth pain, if they've experienced economic hardship, if they have reduced social contact and they're at high risk for loneliness, if they take multiple medications, if they've had involuntary weight loss, if they need assistance with shopping, cooking, and feeding, and if they're elderly, older than 80, it says here. So these are things that can be used, these questions and this acronym, to determine if somebody is at high risk of being malnourished. Determine. All right, so that is the end of the lecture. I appreciate everybody who stuck with me all the way through. So that was chapters 13 and 14. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, concerns, please reach out to me. And I look forward to hearing from you guys as we prepare for our final exam.